"That's my special dress." The toddler sobbed. The fiancé cut it to pieces, not knowing the billionaire was watching. The morning light came in soft and golden through the tall windows of the Harmon estate, touching everything it reached. The marble floors, the crystal vases, the perfectly arranged furniture that no one ever actually sat on. It was the kind of house that made you hold your breath when you walked through it, afraid to leave a fingerprint on anything, afraid to make a sound that might echo too loudly and remind you how empty the rooms really were. Marcus Harmon stood at the window of his home office on the second floor, coffee cup in hand, watching the manicured grounds stretch out before him like something from a magazine spread. 36 years old. Self-made billionaire. Owner of Harmon Industries, a tech empire that stretched across 14 countries. A man who had built everything he touched, except somehow a life that felt real. He was getting married in 6 weeks. He should have been happy. He kept reminding himself of that fact, the way you remind yourself to take your vitamins, methodically without feeling. Diane was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and made other women straighten their backs and men forget what they were saying. She had a law degree, a family name that opened doors, and a laugh that sounded like it had been professionally trained. She was, by every measurable standard, an excellent choice. Marcus just wasn't sure he believed in excellent choices anymore. He turned away from the window and looked at the stack of contracts on his desk, the ones his assistant had flagged as urgent. 3 mergers. A hostile takeover. A philanthropic initiative his PR team had cooked up to soften his public image. He sat down, picked up a pen, and stared at the papers without reading them. His mind kept drifting to the sound he'd heard 2 nights ago. He'd been working late, later than usual, which was saying something, when he'd heard it drifting up from the east wing of the house. Small sound. Soft and clear, like a bell someone had rung once and then covered with their hand. Child singing. He hadn't known there was a child in the house. He'd gone to investigate, moving quietly down the hallway in his socked feet, following the sound until he found it coming from behind a slightly open door, one of the utility rooms near the laundry. He'd looked through the gap and seen her, a little girl maybe 3 years old, sitting on the floor surrounded by a tiny kingdom of mismatched objects. Plastic spoon. Shoelace. 3 bottle caps arranged in a triangle. And she was singing to them, this small, serious song, her dark curly hair piled in 2 uneven puffs on either side of her head. He'd stood there for almost 5 minutes. He hadn't meant to. He'd just forgotten to leave. He'd asked his estate manager about it the next morning. That was when he found out about Rosa. Rosa Medina had been hired 6 months ago, before Marcus had moved back into the main estate full-time, back when Diane had been overseeing the household staff expansion in preparation for the wedding. Rosa was a live-in maid. Quiet, hard-working, kept entirely to herself. She had a daughter named Lily, 3 years old, and part of her employment arrangement included a small room in the east wing where they both stayed. Diane had approved it. It wasn't unusual for live-in staff to have young children. Marcus had nodded and gone back to his work. But he hadn't stopped thinking about that small, serious voice singing to a triangle of bottle caps. He found himself walking through the east wing more often over the next few days. Not intentionally, he told himself. He was just familiarizing himself with the parts of his own home he'd neglected. That was reasonable. That was practical. It had nothing to do with the fact that at approximately 7:30 every morning, a small figure in mismatched socks could be found toddling down the hallway toward the kitchen, dragging a stuffed rabbit by one ear and narrating her journey to no one in particular. "And then we go here," Lily would say, turning a corner with great purpose. "And then we go here. And the bunny says okay." Marcus learned to time his own coffee runs accordingly. He hadn't spoken to her yet. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because speaking to her would make her real in a way that felt complicated, felt like something he'd have to examine. It was easier to just observe. To let this tiny, unself-conscious creature exist at the edges of his carefully ordered life like a small, warm light he hadn't asked for and didn't know what to do with. Rosa, he'd noticed, was exactly the opposite of invisible in the way that truly invisible people are. She moved through the house with a kind of careful efficiency that spoke of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. She was in her late 20s, he guessed, with the same dark curly hair as her daughter and the kind of quiet dignity that sat in her shoulders even when she was on her knees scrubbing a baseboard. She never made eye contact with him when they passed in the hallway. She always said, "Good morning, Mr. Harmon," in a voice that was perfectly polite and perfectly distant. He always said good morning back and then felt, for some reason he couldn't name, like he had failed some small test. Diane arrived that Friday afternoon in a cloud of perfume and energy, dropping designer bags at the foot of the staircase and pulling Marcus into a kiss that felt like a press conference. She was excited about the wedding venue confirmation, about the florist they'd finally locked down, about the engagement photos that had run in 3 major publications. "We're the couple right now," she said, squeezing his arm. "Do you have any idea how much press we're getting?" "That's great," Marcus said. She tilted her head at him, reading him the way she always did. Quickly, clinically. "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine. You need to be present for these next few weeks, Marcus. The merger can wait. The optics of this wedding matter." He nodded. He agreed. He meant it, he thought. But that night when he passed the East Wing on his way to bed, he heard it again. That small, clear voice, this time not singing but talking low and earnest to her rabbit. And without meaning to, he stopped walking. He stood in the dim hallway, a 36-year-old billionaire with 6 weeks until his wedding, and he just listened. "It's okay," Lily was telling her rabbit. "I right here. I not go away." Something in his chest moved, shifted, like a door he'd thought was locked swinging open an inch. He stood there a long time before he finally made himself walk away. Rosa had found the dress at a thrift store on a Tuesday, on her one afternoon off every 2 weeks. She hadn't been looking for it. She'd been looking for a pair of shoes that might fit Lily. Her daughter had grown out of her sneakers so fast it felt almost aggressive, the way toddlers do everything, with complete disregard for practical budgeting. The thrift store was 3 bus stops from the estate, a small crowded place that smelled like cedar and old paperbacks, run by a woman named June who always gave Rosa a paper cup of instant coffee when she came in. The dress had been hanging on the end of a rack, slightly apart from everything else, like it had known it was special and wanted to be seen. It was white cotton with tiny yellow and blue butterflies scattered across the skirt, with a little smocked bodice and short puffed sleeves edged in delicate eyelet lace. It was exactly the kind of dress a little girl should have. Not fancy in the way that made you nervous about spills, but beautiful in the way that made the little girl wearing it feel like the most important person in the room. Whoever had made it had done it with care. Every seam was even. Every butterfly was perfectly placed. Rosa had looked at the price tag. $4. She had stood there in the aisle for a full minute, doing the quiet, constant math that was her life. The tiny calculations between necessity and longing that parents who don't have much learn to do automatically. Lily needed shoes. The shoes she'd found were $6. Together that was 10, and she had 14. And she still needed to save 2 for bus fare and keep 2 for emergencies, which left. She'd bought the dress, and the shoes, and walked to the bus stop feeling like she'd robbed a bank. Lily had seen the dress from across their small room and said, with complete certainty, "That's my dress. Not can I have that or I like that. My dress." Like she'd been waiting for it to find its way back to her. Rosa had sat on the edge of the narrow bed and watched her daughter pull the dress over her pajamas, backwards because she hadn't figured out fronts and backs yet, and couldn't be convinced to care, and spin around 3 times with her arms out, humming. "You like it, baby. It has butterflies," Lily said, with the gravity of someone delivering extremely important news. "It does. Butterflies go to heaven and come back," Lily announced. "Grandma told me." Rosa's breath caught. Lily's grandmother, Rosa's mother, had passed away 8 months ago before they'd come to work at the estate. Lily had been too young to understand death, but she'd been old enough to feel the absence, and somehow at 3, she'd constructed her own quiet theology around it. "That's right, baby," Rosa said softly. "That's exactly right." After that, the dress was Lily's special dress. It came out on Sundays when Rosa had a few hours in the afternoon, and they'd sit in the small garden behind the service wing that the other staff had told her she could use. It came out on Lily's half-birthday, which Rosa had invented because she'd missed the real birthday during a difficult stretch and felt the guilt of it still. It came out on days when Lily was sad, or when she'd fallen and hurt herself, or when the world felt too big and too hard and she needed something to remind her she was loved. Rosa washed it by hand every time, let it air dry, folded it carefully and kept it in the zippered pocket of the one nice bag she owned, the one her mother had given her. If protected. Lily talked to the butterflies sometimes. Rosa had heard her late at night, a small voice in the dark saying things she couldn't quite make out. She never asked what Lily said to them. Some conversations are meant to be private. The trouble started the 3rd week of Diane's extended stay at the estate. Diane had decided, with the cheerful authority of someone who had never been told no, that the East Wing needed to be refreshed before the wedding. Not renovated, just freshened up, she'd said, because some of the wedding guests would be touring the house and she didn't want certain areas looking lived in. Rosa had understood what that meant. She'd quietly moved everything she and Lily owned into 2 small suitcases and a cardboard box, consolidating their presence into as tight a footprint as possible. But she'd been called away that afternoon. Another maid had called in sick, and Rosa had been asked to cover the main floor. She'd meant to move the last box, the one with the dress, before she went. She'd forgotten. She'd been so tired. She was always so tired. The deep bone tired of a woman doing 3 people's work for 1 person's pay, of a woman raising a child alone in a borrowed room, of a woman who hadn't let herself cry in so long she'd started to wonder if she still knew how. She'd forgotten the box. Diane had found it. Rosa didn't know this yet. She was on the main floor, polishing silver that was already polished, her mind half on Lily, who was in the small day room with a coloring book, supervised by the estate's other maid, who had a daughter of her own and had offered. In the East Wing things were happening. And in the 2nd floor study, Marcus Harmon had just discovered that the security camera he'd installed in the east hallway, part of a system he'd upgraded 2 years ago and mostly forgotten about, was still running. He'd pulled it up on his laptop absently, checking the feed during a call, and seen something that made him go very still. He set down the phone. He watched the screen. He felt something happen inside his chest that he didn't have a word for yet. Something that started as confusion and moved slowly through discomfort, and arrived somewhere that felt uncomfortably like grief. He watched for a long time. Then he closed his laptop, stood up and walked downstairs. The hallway camera had captured it all. Marcus had gone back and watched the footage from the beginning, rewinding to the moment Diane had walked into the East Wing with that particular stride she had. Purposeful, slightly impatient, the walk of someone who had decided in advance that whatever they were about to encounter was beneath them. She'd found the cardboard box sitting outside Rosa's door. She'd opened it without hesitation, the way someone opens something they've already decided belongs to them. He watched her lift out a small folded dress, white with little butterflies, the kind of thing that cost nothing and meant everything, and hold it up. He could see her face on the camera, the slight curl of her lip, the quick, dismissive assessment. Then she'd gone to the supply closet at the end of the hall, come back with a pair of fabric scissors, and cut the dress into pieces. Not out of anger. That was the thing that hit Marcus hardest, rewatching it. She hadn't been angry. She hadn't found a stain or thought it was a rag or had some misguided practical reason. She'd done it calmly, methodically, the way she did everything, decisively, efficiently, without the smallest flicker of doubt. She'd cut it into 6 or 7 pieces, dropped them back in the box and walked away. As she turned the corner, he'd seen her brush her hands together once, lightly, like she was dusting off something minor. He sat in front of his laptop for a long time after the footage ended. He thought about a 3-year-old girl spinning in a white butterfly dress, arms out, humming. He thought about a woman who washed a $4 dress by hand because it was her daughter's most precious thing. He thought about Diane's hands, moving those scissors with such calm. He stood up. His jaw was tight. He made himself breathe. He had learned, over 36 years and the particular education of building an empire from the ground up, that the most important moments of your life are rarely the ones you plan for. They're the small, unguarded moments, the accidental revealing moments, when a person shows you exactly who they are when they believe no one important is watching. Every contract negotiation had taught him this. Every hiring decision, every partnership, every relationship. It's not what people do on the stage. It's what they do in the empty hallway. Diane had been in what she believed was an empty hallway. She had shown him exactly who she was. He found Rosa on the main floor, on her knees beside a low cabinet, arranging the linens that had come back from the launderer. She didn't hear him come in, and he stood for a moment in the doorway, watching her work. She had a small crease of concentration between her brows, and she was moving with that same quiet efficiency he'd noticed before, the movements of someone who took pride in work that no one would ever compliment them for. "Rosa," he said quietly. She startled, pushing herself to her feet. "Mr. Harmon. I'm sorry I didn't hear you. Is something wrong with the linens? I can." "Nothing's wrong with the linens." He paused. "Could you come with me for a moment?" She followed him, and he could feel her anxiety even from a few steps ahead. That particular tension of an employee summoned unexpectedly, the mental inventory of everything you might have done wrong. He hated that she felt that. He made a note of it. He led her to the east wing, to the box outside her door. He picked it up and handed it to her. She took it, puzzled. Then she opened it, and he watched her face. She understood immediately. Parents always do. The recognition of their child's most beloved things is instantaneous, cellular. She pulled out one of the cut pieces and held it, and the piece had a butterfly on it. Just one, its wings separated from the rest of the small white body. She didn't cry. He noticed that. Her eyes went bright and she pressed her lips together very hard, and her hand tightened on the scrap of fabric, but she didn't cry. He thought, watching her, that this was a woman who had gotten very practiced at not crying in front of people. "I'm so sorry," he said. His voice came out rough. "I'm genuinely, deeply sorry this happened." She looked up at him, and he saw something complex move across her face. Surprise, mostly. Like she hadn't expected sorry from him. Like sorry wasn't something she'd budgeted for. It's all right," she said automatically, the way people say it when it isn't. "It's not," he said. "Please don't say that. It's not all right." She blinked, looked back down at the piece in her hand. "This was Lily's special dress," she said softly, and her voice cracked, just barely on the last two words. She called it that. Her special dress. She talked to the butterflies. Something in Marcus's throat tightened. "I know," he said. And then, because she looked startled, "I heard her once. In the hallway. She was telling them something. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, He stopped. "I just stopped walking." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. The careful distance she usually maintained, the professional wall, wavered just slightly. Like a window opening an inch. "It was my mother's favorite color," she said. "Yellow. Lily picked this dress herself. She said the butterflies were Grandma coming to visit." Marcus said nothing for a moment. He just let that sit. Let it be what it was. "I'm going to take care of this," he said finally. "Mr. Harmon, you really don't need to." "Rosa." His voice was quiet, firm. Not commanding, something else. Something more like a promise. I'm going to take care of this. She looked at him again. And this time she didn't look away as quickly. He had calls to make. Decisions to consider that he'd been circling around for weeks now. That this moment had crystallized with sudden, painful clarity. He had a conversation ahead of him that was going to be difficult, and a future to reconfigure, and approximately 6 weeks of careful planning to unravel. But first, he took out his phone and called the best children's boutique in the city. I need a white dress, he said. With butterflies. For a 3-year-old. Spare nothing. Lily found out about her dress on a Wednesday. Rosa had tried to keep it from her. Had stayed up half the night trying to think of some way to explain the absence that wouldn't break her daughter's small heart. Had considered saying the dress was at the cleaners, was lost, had gone on a trip. But she'd forgotten to move the box. And Lily, with the unerring radar of a 3-year-old for exactly the thing you most want them not to find, had found it. She'd been in their room while Rosa was making the bed, and she'd dragged the box out from under the little table Rosa had been using as a desk, and she'd opened it, and she'd pulled out the pieces. Rosa turned around and saw her daughter sitting on the floor holding a fragment of white cotton with half a butterfly on it. And the expression on Lily's face was something Rosa knew she would carry for the rest of her life. It wasn't the expression of a child throwing a tantrum. It wasn't anger or shock. It was something quieter and much more devastating. It was grief. Pure, real, unperformed grief. The kind that adults spend years learning to dress up in acceptable clothing, arriving absolutely naked on the face of a 3-year-old. Mama, Lily said. Her voice was very small. This my dress. I know, baby. It's broken. I know. Somebody broke it. Rosa crossed the room and sank to the floor beside her daughter, and she pulled her into her lap, and Lily held the piece of dress against her chest and began to cry. Not the crying of frustrated children, not the loud demanding cry, the soft, bewildered cry of someone trying to understand how something precious could just be gone. She cried and cried, quiet and confused, and Rosa held her and thought, with a clarity that cut, we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be living in one room in a corner of someone else's house, where someone can take the only beautiful thing my daughter owns and cut it up and not even think about what it cost. She was still holding Lily, still in that place of raw, tired grief, when she heard the knock at the door. She assumed it was someone from the staff. She called 1 minute and wiped her face, settled Lily on her hip, opened the door. Marcus Harmon was standing in the hallway with a large white box tied with a yellow ribbon. He was still in his work clothes, dress shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he looked slightly uncertain, which was an expression Rosa had never seen on his face before, and it changed him somehow. Made him look less like a photograph and more like a person. He looked at Lily. Lily looked at him with red-rimmed eyes, still clutching her fragment of dress. "Hi," Marcus said to her. Lily studied him with the unsentimental assessment of a small child. "You the tall man." "I am the tall man," he agreed gravely. "You live here." "I do." Lily considered this. "We live here too," she said, in the tone of someone establishing the terms of a treaty. "I know," he said. "I'm glad you do." He held out the white box. "This is for you." Lily looked at the box, looked at him, looked at the box again. Then she looked at Rosa with an expression that clearly said, "Is this okay?" Rosa swallowed, nodded. Lily reached out both small arms and took the box, which was almost as big as she was, and sat down right there in the doorway and pulled the ribbon off with focused determination. Rosa and Marcus both crouched down to her level, and neither of them was aware they'd done it at the same time. Lily opened the box. Inside, nested in white tissue paper, was a dress. It was white cotton, the finest cotton, the kind that would be soft against a child's skin. And it was covered, the bodice, the skirt, the sleeves, in hand-embroidered butterflies in yellow and blue, each one slightly different, each one stitched with such care that they seemed almost three-dimensional. Around the hem, in the tiniest embroidery, were dozens more, so small they looked like a garden seen from the sky. The smocking on the bodice was perfect. The eyelet lace at the sleeves was intricate and delicate and beautiful. Lily didn't say anything for a long time. She reached into the box and touched one butterfly with one finger. Carefully, reverently, the way you touch something sacred. "They're alive," she whispered. "They might be," Marcus said quietly. Lily looked up at him with eyes that were still wet from crying and said, with absolute, solemn, devastating certainty, "Grandma sent them." The hallway went very quiet. Rosa pressed her hand to her mouth. Marcus looked at this 3-year-old child, this small certain person with her uneven hair puffs and her fragment of her old dress still clutched in one fist, and he felt something happen in the deep center of his chest. Something opening, something that had been closed for a very long time, something he hadn't even known was shut. "I think you're right," he said, and his voice came out lower than he intended, rougher. "I think she did." Lily picked up the dress and held it against her front and stood up and turned around once. Right there in the doorway, her arms out, humming. Rosa was crying now. Silently, turned slightly away, but crying. Her shoulders moved. Marcus reached over and very gently handed her the box of tissues from her room's small table, not making a thing of it, not drawing attention, just handing her the tissues. A small, practical kindness. She took them. And when she looked at him, something had changed in her expression. The wall was down. Not all of it, you can't take down all the walls at once. They're structural, they're what you built yourself around when you had to, but enough. Enough that he could see her, and she could see him. And they were just two people crouched on the floor in a hallway watching a little girl hold a dress full of butterflies and hum. "Thank you," Rosa said. Just that. Just 2 words. But she meant it all the way down. "She should have beautiful things," Marcus said. He paused. "You both should." Lily sat back down and began informing each butterfly about herself. Her name, her rabbit's name, the important things. Her voice was bright again. The clouds already passing the way they do at 3, when the world is still mostly merciful. Rosa watched her and felt, underneath the grief and exhaustion, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For just a moment, in just this small way. He felt safe. Diane was on a video call with the wedding planner when Marcus walked in. She was at the large desk in the guest suite she'd been using, surrounded by fabric swatches and seating charts and all the elaborate machinery of a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear and a half-eaten salad to her right, and she looked up at Marcus's entrance with a mildly impatient expression of someone who expected him to read the room and come back later. He didn't come back later. He pulled a chair and sat down. She held up one finger, just a moment, and he waited, watching her with an expression she apparently didn't recognize because she finished the call without feeling any particular urgency in her spine, set down the pencil, and gave him the pleasant, slightly distracted smile of someone ready to discuss wedding logistics. "I know you want to talk about the guest list," she started. "But I want to finish the—" "I saw the footage," Marcus said. Diane blinked. "What footage?" "From the East Wing security camera." He paused. "The dress, Diane." Something moved across her face. A very quick sequence of things. Recognition. Calculation. And then, with a speed that told him everything, the slight lifting of her chin that was her version of a shrug. "Oh, that. Marcus, it was a rag in a box. I was trying to. It was a child's dress. 3-year-old child's dress. It was the most important thing she owned. I didn't know that. You didn't ask." His voice was level, not raised, steady in a way that was somehow worse than raised. "You didn't ask because you didn't consider that it might be important. Because you didn't consider her at all." Diane set down her pencil. She was reading the room now. He could see her doing it, could see her recalibrating. "Okay. I understand you're upset. I'll apologize to—" "What's her name?" Marcus said. Diane paused. "Whose name?" "The child. The 3-year-old whose dress you cut up. What's her name?" Bree. "The maid has a daughter. Her name is Lily," Marcus said. "She's 3 years old. Her grandmother died 8 months ago. Her grandmother's favorite color was yellow." Lily believes the butterflies on the dress were her grandmother coming to visit her. Stop. That is what you cut up, Diane. Not a rag. Not clutter. A little girl's connection to her grandmother who she is never going to see again. The room was very quiet. Diane's face was very still in the way that faces get when they're working hard. He could see her choosing her response, trying on different approaches. Contrition, yes, contrite would be effective here, but he'd known her long enough now to see the machinery of it. The calculation. That's very sad, she said, and she made her voice soft. And I feel awful about it. Truly. But Marcus, you're talking about a piece of clothing. I understand it matters to them, but it's not about the dress, he said. She waited. I've been telling myself something for a long time, Marcus said. He was looking at the window, at the grounds outside, at the place where the gardens met the tree line. I've been telling myself that the parts of a person that are inconvenient, the parts that make me uncomfortable or uncertain, I've been telling myself those things are just nerves. Wedding jitters. That once we're married, once things settle, I'll feel. He stopped. Started again. But that's not how it works. You don't become a different person after a wedding. You just become a more permanent version of the person you already are. Marcus. Her voice had sharpened. You didn't care, he said simply. Not because you're a bad person, but because she wasn't on your map. She didn't exist in your field of concern. And that. He turned to look at her. That terrifies me. Because it means a lot of people don't exist on your map, Diane. And I don't want to build a life with someone who has that map. You're ending our engagement, Diane said. Not a question. Her voice was flat now, the performance dropped, and he thought, with a distant sadness, that this was actually the most real she'd ever sounded. Yes, he said. She stared at him. He expected anger, hot, immediate anger, but what he saw instead was something more complex. A bruised dignity. A very brief flash of something that might have been hurt. And then, under that, very quickly sealed over, the kind of cold assessment she was genuinely gifted at. You're making a mistake, she said. Maybe, he said. But it's mine to make. He had told his attorney before he'd come into this room. He had already begun the process of unwinding the various practical entanglements that 2 years together had created. He'd thought about this, had sat with it, and he'd arrived at this moment not impulsively but with a particular certainty that comes from seeing something you can't unsee. The conversations that followed that day were long and difficult. The press would make it a story, they always did. There would be a cost to this decision measured in ways he couldn't fully anticipate. But that evening, when he walked through the east wing on his way to the kitchen, he heard Lily's voice. She was telling her new butterfly dress about her day. And then I cried, she was saying with matter-of-fact honesty. But then I was okay. And the butterflies came. Marcus stood in the hallway and listened. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. 6 months later, the east wing had a proper bedroom in it. Not a maid's room. A real bedroom, with a window seat that looked over the gardens and a bookshelf that went all the way to the ceiling with a little wooden ladder that Lily had, after approximately 3 unsupervised minutes, attempted to use as a climbing wall. There was a small desk where Rosa sat in the evenings and worked on the counting courses she'd started, the ones Marcus had quietly made possible without making a production of it, because he was learning, slowly, imperfectly, the difference between helping and managing, between caring for someone and deciding for them. The butterfly dress had a place of honor. Not in a box, not tucked away in a bag. It hung on a small hook by the window, where the morning light came in and made the embroidered butterflies look, if you tilted your head just right, like they were considering flying. Lily looked at it every morning when she woke up. Some mornings she said, "Good morning, Grandma." Some mornings she just touched one wing and got on with her day. Rosa had not planned for any of this. That was the thing she came back to again and again, not with disbelief but with a kind of wondering gratitude that had no clean shape. She had built her life on the principle of planning for everything, because when you have a child and no net beneath you, You learn very fast that improvisation is a luxury and preparation is the closest thing to safety that exists. She had planned for every contingency. She had not planned for a tall man to crouch on a hallway floor and hand a 3-year-old a dress full of butterflies and look, for just a moment, like someone who had found the right place to be. She and Marcus had moved toward each other the way cautious people do, slowly with frequent stops, checking the ground before each step. There had been no dramatic declarations, no grand gestures after the dress. He had begun stopping to talk when he saw her in the hallways. Really talk, not the polite exchange of good morning and have a nice day. He'd asked about her accounting courses. She'd asked about the Harmon Industries expansion she'd read about in a news notification on her phone. He'd looked surprised that she'd read it. She'd told him, with the directness she'd mostly been keeping stored, that just because she cleaned other people's houses didn't mean she'd stopped being curious about the world. He'd laughed then. A real laugh, not the public one. Something surprised and unguarded that changed his entire face. She'd thought, watching that laugh, oh, there you are. Lily had no such complications. Lily had decided almost immediately that Marcus was acceptable, and had communicated this by beginning to leave him things. A particularly interesting rock, a drawing, once a single cracker she'd been eating that she'd apparently decided was worth sharing. He'd received each offering with appropriate gravity. He'd kept the drawing. When she'd noticed it on his desk, she'd given him a look of deep approval and said, "Good," and he'd told Rosa later that it was the most meaningful performance review he'd ever received. The estate had changed. Not dramatically. It was still the same marble and crystal and manicured grounds, all the beautiful architecture of a life built with money and care. But it had stopped being a magazine spread and started being somewhere people actually lived. There were coloring books on the coffee table in the sitting room. There was a small pair of rain boots by the back garden door. There was a bowl of slightly overripe bananas on the kitchen counter that no one threw away because Lily had named them. Rosa sometimes stood in the kitchen in the early morning before anyone else was up with her coffee, looking out at the gardens, and she thought about her mother. Her mother had been a woman who believed that the things that came to you when you weren't looking for them, those were the real things. The things you planned you could hold. The things that arrived unexpectedly, those held you. She'd said it in Spanish, the phrase landing differently, weightier, in the language of Rosa's childhood. Rosa had thought, in the hard years after her mother died, that she'd stopped believing that. She'd thought grief had made a practical woman out of her. Had burned away the kind of faith that leaves you open to the unexpected. She'd been wrong. Marcus had asked her, one evening in the garden while Lily conducted an important investigation into whether snails could be friends with ladybugs, what she had wanted to be. Back before everything, back when the future still felt like something she was designing rather than responding to. It was a question no one had asked her in years. She'd been quiet for a long time. "I wanted to teach," she'd said finally. "Kids. Young kids. I wanted to be the kind of teacher that kids remembered." He'd looked at her. "You still could," he'd said, quietly. Not as a command, not as a rescue. Just as a fact. As something he believed. She'd looked back at Lily, who had apparently reached a favorable verdict on snail-ladybug friendship, and was now introducing both parties to her rabbit. "I know," Rosa had said. And she'd found, saying it, that she believed it too. Maybe for the first time in years. "I know I could." The butterfly dress moved slightly in the morning breeze through the open window. Lily was asleep, one arm around her rabbit, her hair spread across the pillow in a dark cloud. Her face perfectly, completely peaceful. Rosa stood in the doorway and watched her breathe. Some things end, she thought. Some things get cut up and left in boxes and seem like they're gone forever. And then something unexpected happens. A man in a hallway, a box with a yellow ribbon, a morning light that finds its way in. And you realize that nothing really precious is ever fully lost. Just changes shape. Finds new ways to reach you. On the window sill, exactly where the sunlight came in clearest, a butterfly had landed. A real one, yellow and blue, its wings opening and closing slowly, as if it had somewhere to be but had decided, just for this moment, to stay. Rosa pressed her fingers to her lips. "Hi, Mama," she whispered. The butterfly stayed a moment longer. Then it lifted, caught the air, and was gone into the golden morning. And Rosa smiled, full, real, unheld. The kind of smile that comes when you finally, after a long time carrying things alone, allow yourself to believe that you are, at last, somewhere you are meant to be. The end.